Welcome to this series of presentations where we're going to look at what Jesus said about various topics and themes. We start by looking at how Jesus actually did his teaching. How did Jesus teach? Here are some surprising facts. If you take all the teaching that's recorded in the Gospels, put it end to end, it barely lasts 3 hours. Jesus spent most of his time with a small group. There is a reference to the disciples, but we know there were ladies also in the group. Now, he did teach bigger crowds from time to time, but working with a small group was the main focus of his teaching. When he taught, he used parables. If you count them up, there's about 46 of them. And most of them are just based on ordinary life events that would be familiar to his audience. But we've got to admit it, many are difficult to understand. Teaching in those days wasn't presentation, it was more dialogue. When Jesus was asked a question, he often responded by asking a question. He didn't give neat, pat answers. He provoked challenge, thought, so that we could search it out, work out its implications for ourselves. Now, as we look at the way of Jesus' teaching, I want us to focus on one parable. Choose this one because, one, it's very familiar to us, and secondly, there's a bit of teaching at the end of it about why Jesus used a parable like the parable of the sower. Now, you'll find it in 3 places. The longest form is in Matthew chapter 13. But it's recorded by 3 of the 4 gospel writers. Now, we're familiar with the story. Perhaps Jesus was standing there, sitting there with his friends, with a group, and suddenly he could see in the distance a farmer scattering the seed by hand, which was the way of seed planting in those days. The seed was just scattered over the soil. And he thought of the outcomes, and he used this as an illustration. He pictures 4 kinds of soil. Then he pictures the outcome when the seed lands on each one of these soils. When it lands on the path, it's a bit hard. Too easy for the birds to come along and get the seed. And he pictures this as the message not understood. If you like, Satan steals it away. Never gets into the soil. He pictures the rocky areas where there's quick growth, but there's not enough dampness. And when the sun gets up, burns out. Pictures this as a quick positive reaction, but no deep roots. Then he pictures it landing amongst thorns round the edge of the field. And the thorns seem to grow faster than the seeds, and they choke out the growing plants. And he pictures this as other things in life choke out the real growth. But then he pictures landing on good soil, where there's good growth. The plants grow, there's a harvest, and the farmer can get the grain back multiple times to feed his family. And he pictures this as hearing, understanding. So we're responding to whatever has been taught to us. But then the disciples come to him afterwards. Remember, most of his teaching was in a small group. And they say to him, "Why do you speak to the people in parables?" Strange answer, he replied, "Because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them." That's a very strange statement. But the challenge of that statement provokes the thought in the disciples' minds. Now Jesus expands it this way. This is why I speak to them in parables. He's answering their question now. Though seeing, they don't see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You'll be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. Now that's a quotation from Isaiah chapter 6. It's used by Isaiah when God spoke it to him in chapter 6 to warn Isaiah that the hearers wouldn't listen to him and follow what he said. Because Isaiah had asked the question, how long do I have to keep saying this? And basically God's answer is, you go on saying it forever, but they won't listen, they won't obey, they won't follow. And history shows that's exactly what happened. Isaiah went on saying it for decades, and the people would not listen. But what Isaiah said was true, came to pass. And that passage from Isaiah is quoted several places in the New Testament with the same meaning. People hear it, but they don't take it in. They simply don't want to take it in. And that's the picture and the challenge that Jesus is putting to his disciple group, making them think. And then he goes on, but blessed are your eyes because they see, your ears because they hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. That inner group, which grew from time to time, people who were prepared to listen, who were prepared, if you like, to open their eyes, unstopper their ears, and pay attention, question, think it through, and then respond to it. That's the goal. Against that background, Jesus teaching in parables. Doesn't mean to say that we have to teach in parables today. Our culture is different. But these are vivid stories drawn from the lifestyles of the hearers, and they're not designed to give pat answers. They're designed to provoke thought, question, challenge, a response. See, most people couldn't read or write. They didn't get their understandings from books. There was no television or radio. Things were communicated by stories. It was an oral culture. And these stories that Jesus gave would be memorable. The people would remember the story after the event, and it gave them a chance to rethink it through again. But they were designed to generate further questions. If you ponder that for a moment, that must be a fundamental goal of all teaching. You see, the stories, they need to be worked out, discussed, argued over. It provokes thought, it provokes questions, it provokes doubts and confusions because we have to work it through. How does it work out in life? What's the meaning? What's the significance? It's not a question of giving information. It's a question of challenging people, provoking them, so that they will respond and think through the implications for lifestyle. Now, there are principles behind us for us today. We have in this a teaching model for teaching in churches. It doesn't follow that we have to teach in parables. We are not an oral culture. We're a visual culture. And sadly, one of the things that's missing so often in church teaching is the visual. But there are principles behind this for us today. The goal of the teacher isn't the communication of information. And if you think about it, the goal of the school teacher or the university teacher or the college lecturer is not just communicating information. It's challenging thought, provoking further questions, trying to get at people to understanding so that it makes a difference in whatever they're seeking to study. We're not in the business of stuffing our heads with information. That's not what it's all about in churches. That's the goal. Because that reflects how Jesus taught. He taught to provoke thought and questioning, using, as it were, the technology of his day, which was vivid storytelling, parables. And he brings others in. Because of the challenge, it raises questions. There's dialogue, negotiation, debate, challenge, working it through. What are the implications for lifestyle? That's the underpinning goal. How to live for Jesus. Kingdom living. Living reflecting the quality of the lifestyle that Jesus demonstrated in his life. That's the goal for all teaching. Let's make that central. And whatever teaching goes on in our church groups today must reflect that goal. It's not designed to show that someone's clever. It's not designed to impart lots of information. It's not basically an intellectual exercise. It's a practical exercise. By dialogue, debate, challenge, we are together learning how to live more like Jesus. That's the goal, and that's the message of Jesus using parables. The problem is we think of teaching like that. Someone standing at the front, speaking. That's not the biblical way of teaching. In fact, it's not really the way that's used in schools or in university classes. We've got to strip away that idea. That's not teaching, and it's not the way Jesus did it. It's more like that. A group with questioning, challenge, dialogue, exploring the implications into life. What does this mean? How does it affect the way I live? How does it affect the way I speak? How does it affect the way I relate to others? That's the challenge. That's what teaching's all about. Yes, a more experienced leader will provoke the questions and direct the thinking. But it's not simply presentation of information. It's provoking thought, directing thinking, so that the group together can move out into life to live more like Jesus. Because that's the goal. We don't do it by presentations from the front. We do it by questioning, dialogue, discussion, where people raise the real issues of life, and we look at them against the backcloth of what Jesus said and did. How do we work these through into practical daily living? That's the goal, so that we can help each other to live more like Jesus. Different way of thinking, but then so often Jesus challenges our thinking and takes us to a new, different way of thinking. And even in the area of teaching, he does that when we think through why he used parables and what he taught about why he used parables. They were not neat pat answers. They were not logical presentations. They were designed to provoke challenge and thought so that we could live more like him. That is our goal in teaching today. This means that we need to listen to Jesus more carefully. That's a very deep thought behind that. You see, it takes time. Time to think about what he's saying and its implications for life. But we've got to throw away our own preconceived ideas. Too often we come having already decided what things are like. Challenge, and that's what Jesus did all the time. He brought challenge to preconceived ideas. What is he saying? How is he living? What are the implications? Let's be willing to throw away our previous ideas when against the teaching of Jesus they're shown to be inadequate. That's not easy, but that allows us to move on and to live more like Jesus. You see, teaching's pointless unless it brings to action. It must bring action on afterwards. It must lead to it. It must direct it. We must be willing to do what he's telling us to do, to live the way he's telling us to live, to say what he's telling us to say, or perhaps not say, to live more like Jesus. These are the principles, and as we go through this series and look at some of the teaching, let's apply these principles and take them out into life, that we might live more like Jesus. In the next presentation, we're going to look at what Jesus said about the kingdom of God.